Hello! I'm Sarah, obviously. I record videos sometimes with what have you, and you may have seen our recent reviewing things where I talk about other people's things, which is a lot easier than talking about your own thing. I have literally just realised in the last 15 seconds. This is my book. It's very book-like. It's made of paper and trees and ink. You can buy this book on Amazon. You can buy it as a book that's made of trees and ink, or you can buy it as a book that's made of ones and zeros and that you can read on a phone or a tablet or a Kindle or many other kinds of things. You could print it out secretly at work, but it's like 300 pages long. Why would you do that? It's a book that I wrote for my master's degree, and it combines my love of Little House on the Prairie with my love of terrible things happening to good people. So it's a book about a lady called Laura who lives on the prairie with her husband William, and they're having a really bad year in a long life of bad years, and they have no money but many children. And then a nice man comes and lives next door to them, who is young and from the city and doesn't really know one end of a plough from the other end, which is pretty tragic if you're trying to plant corn, am I right? I had to learn a lot about planting corn, I'm sorry. If you're a farmer, that would have been hilarious. And so this young man turns up from back east, and oh no, he's not a young man, he's a young lady with short hair. But Laura doesn't know that, and she thinks he's really nice, and then she starts maybe thinking he's really nice, and then that man who is actually a lady is a little bit confused. I'm represented by a literary agent at PFD, which is in London, not in like Mexico, underground, in a hut. So it's an actual literary agency, chose to represent me. Sadly, no one wanted to publish my book because lesbians apparently don't read, and no one likes America because of Donald Trump. So it was a bad time to try and sell this book. But you can now buy it. The ebook is only $3.99. The hard copy book, which is beautiful, look at it, so shiny, wonderful, has a blurb, has a little barcode. You can go beep if you have a barcode reader at home. You can buy that, that's $8.99, and you can buy that as normal through Amazon, the way you'd buy literally anything else in the world. You could buy eggs on there, but you can also buy my book. Buy 20 and give them as presents to your friends and family. It's been recently reviewed by Diva magazine. Diva magazine said that it was epic and great and wonderful, and you can read that review on the website. If you go to my Goodreads page, that review is the first thing that you will see, because that's how much I love that review. Vicky, who is my talented co-star in our videos that we make about other things, has agreed to record the prologue and first chapter as a little audio. So if you're like me and you like having YouTube videos on in the background while you paint your nails, do your hair, or try to scrub something off your kitchen counter, then listen to the rest of this and enjoy.
Night Fires in the Distance by Sarah Goodwin. Prologue. I threw another dress on the fire and watched the flames take it. Black smoke rose up from the wet fabric, and the smell of burnt cotton mixed with those of urine and blood. I scooped a stained bedsheet from the pile at my feet and threw it on the fire. There were grasshoppers caught in the cotton, and I watched them burn. All around me the ground crawled with them. Some jumped stupidly into the flames, some were crushed under my boots, the rest just scavenged for anything not yet eaten. The smoke made my eyes run. I wiped my face with my hands, picked up the rest of the clothes and fed the fire. I'd always worried about our fires and the long grasses of the prairie. A prairie fire was the definition of hell. Nowhere to go, flames all around and acres eaten up in a minute, but now there was no grass. Summer had baked the earth bare. No corn, wheat, beans, nothing green anywhere. Just the dust blowing across the ground and the brown bodies of the grasshoppers. This was hell. I heard over the whirring sound of the insects one of my daughters crying. They were all hungry, like I was. I stamped over the grasshoppers away from the fire. The rifle was just inside the soddy door, and I took it and the patch box. Before I closed the door on my family to keep the insects out, I wondered if it would not be better to shoot them now. Spare them the end that was coming, slow as it was. It was getting hard to think. No water, no sleep. The grasshoppers weren't leaving. The rain wasn't coming. It was only for them that I'd kept on. I could give my own life up, but I had to fight for theirs. It was all I knew how to do. With the rifle in my hands, I went around the fire and towards the barn, where the oxen lowed hungrily. At least today I could feed my family, even if it meant fighting with grasshoppers for every bit of the ox meat. Outside the barn I looked up as I had for so many days, but there still wasn't a cloud in the sky. Chapter 1. By the summer James arrived, I hadn't seen a tree in 2 years. Sometimes I tried to remember what a tree sounded like. I could see the damn thing, the trunk, the branches, the roots, I could feel it. But I couldn't remember the sound of leaves moving in the wind or the way rain sounded on them in a storm. You wouldn't think that was something a person could forget, but somehow I could never fix it right in my head. There were no trees on the western prairie. Practically the only things we had out here were the grass and sky. I was sitting in the shade of my house, my back to the sod wall, peeling early potatoes. The dry grass of the sod prickled against my neck and the sun beat down on me. I wasn't fit for most work, being only a few weeks from having my 7th child, though of the previous 6, only 3 were still living. Rachel was taking care of my youngest, Beth, and their brother Thomas was out with their father. I filled the iron kettle with water and the potatoes, then hung it over the bare circle of ground where I made our fires. I twisted up some hunks of prairie grass and dried them out in the sun as kindling. To keep the fire going, I stacked up buffalo chips. They smelled no worse than horse dung and burnt cleaner than coal. The potato skins were destined for the pig, along with our other scraps. Our winter side of bacon was already forming nicely within its hairy hide. While the hog ate, I scratched its back with a stick and watched the flies scatter as its skin twitched. In the soddy, I wiped the paring knife with a cloth and put it away. I wiped my forehead with my hand. Though the 2 windows let in some of the hot air that baked the ground outside, the thick turf, walls and roof oozed damp and cold into the room. The girls were on the corn husk tick where they slept, by the far wall. Beth looked ready to start fussing. Rachel had given up on trying to entertain her. She didn't have her brother's patience. Rachel was very like her father, quick to anger and slow to let go of a grudge. Beth stumbled off the tick and crossed the room, little fists out, clasping. I steadied her as she clung to my skirts. "Ma, I'm hungry." "You'll get your supper soon, if you let go of me so I can get on with making it. Why don't you go play with your sister?" She tugged at my skirt, starting to cry. I knew there'd be no shaking her off. I poured some of the water out of the heavy bucket into a jug, covered it with a cloth. Rachel picked up her sewing with her face turned from the door. I petted Beth's hair, but she only clung tighter, like she knew I had an idea to pull her from my skirts like a burr. "Take your sister, please, Rachel. I've supper to look after." Rachel's face was a black blur of pure temper. She had her father's dark hair and muddy complexion. Somehow she always looked dirty, angry, and uncared for. I had my eye on her, but she didn't move. "Now, Rachel!" My voice was sharp, my back aching. Why couldn't I have just one obedient daughter? "Yes, Ma." Her voice was sullen, but she put down her sewing and came to take Beth, who struggled until Rachel pinched her fat little leg. I pretended not to see. Beth popped her thumb into her mouth and sucked. I went back into the heat to tend supper. Rachel carried Beth out and set her on the grass while she spread a blanket and set out plates and utensils for everyone. Supper was salt-risen bread and potato hash. Back in England I'd made such fine loaves with my mother and sisters, plaited golden loaves shaped like ears of corn or baskets of fish. There's only one kind of loaf you can make with salt-risen dough, brick-shaped. I filled the coffee pot and put it on the fire, stirred the hash and cut up the bread. What I'd have given for a cup of cold water, a piece of my mother's light white loaf, and a bit of butter. Will, his dark hair thick with sweat, came round the ox shed with Thomas, carrying his scythe. They'd been cutting and shocking corn, getting the harvest in. "Pa!" Beth called out, and Rachel ran to meet them, passing Thomas by to hug her father. Thomas looked the most like me, with my mulch-brown hair, the same freckles, and turned to his nose. He sat down right away on the edge of the blanket. He may have been the eldest at 10, but I ached to see him so worn down and tired. He looked up at me, his mouth twisting upwards in a small smile. Will cut his eyes in Thomas's direction. "Go wash up." Thomas got to his feet slowly and went into the soddy to wash his hands and face for dinner. "You shouldn't boss him so, he's tired." "And I suppose I'm not?" Will raised his thick, dark eyebrows and unwound Rachel's arms from his waist. "I've done the larger share of the work." "He's only a boy." "I was helping my father at 6 years. Will turned from me to the fire. "Is that coffee ready?" I poured a cup, still wanting to argue. He took it from me and sat down, hands unwashed. Thomas came back with wet shirt cuffs and I handed out bread. The sun was going down, the light still yellow, but with shadow creeping in behind the ox shed and the sty. The grass kept up a steady beat against the wind. Only the girls had the energy to speak, and one look from their father reduced them to bowed heads and silence. It was like eating with a damn bear, not knowing when you were about to get your head ripped off. After dinner was finished, I scraped the plates and wiped them clean. As darkness came down on the prairie, we took up the blanket, put out our fire, and went inside. William drew the bar on the door. I herded the girls behind the canvas that was draped across one corner and helped them into their nightgowns. "Ma, when will Pa be going into town?" Rachel asked. "Soon, when the harvest is done." The thought of that harvest tallying up against our long list of needs put a snake in my belly, coiled tight. For a moment I couldn't breathe. "And will he buy us candy?" "If you're good, and mind me. You may even have new shoes for when the snow comes." Rachel smiled, and I wondered if she remembered England, where we'd always had shoes for winter and the market had been only just over the hill rather than a full day's journey away in a town Will never took us to. William settled in one chair, I in another, and we shared the last of the coffee while the children drifted off to sleep. 21 peeking in the window, and who was there to do that this far into Indian territory? We might have looked happy, content with our lot. I wanted to scream. With the children, I had to lie about candy and better things to come. With Will, there was just silence or meanness. If there'd been any hiding place on the prairie, I would have gone to it and screamed until there was no air in me. I would have screamed damn and hell until my throat bled, instead of keeping all those curses inside. "Looks like we're doing all right as far as time's concerned," Will said after a long silence. "Tomorrow we can finish up on the corn, get that wheat in. I should be clear to get to town at the end of next week. Pick up bottling supplies, trade for the rest." "Good." I was thinking of all the salting and pickling and preserving to come, of another winter living on cornbread and chokecherry jam. When I made the bread for dinner, I noticed we were low on cornmeal and we've used the last of the molasses. "I'll take care of it, but you could stand to make things stretch further." I lowered my eyes. "I just worry about the baby." I touched my belly. "It needs fresh greens, a bit of meat, make sure it's born strong." "You'll have it at the end of the harvest." "I think it might come soon. Is there a woman in town, someone to help me when the baby arrives?" A frown drew in between his brows. "Not much in town but the store and a few houses, mostly men setting up for their wives to come join them. Unless you want a whore to play midwife for you." "I thought you might know some decent women." He snorted. "I don't think I've ever met a decent woman." I looked away, took my sewing from its bag under the table. I could hardly see it in the feeble light of the lamp. "It's just, this one will be the first away from the help of women," I said, hoping he'd soften at seeing me afraid. "Well, you had that doctor in Ohio with Beth, and he was no use, barely earned his fee." He scratched the coarse hair on his jaw. "Besides, you have Rachel." "She's only 8. What does she know about birthing, aside from what she's seen of barn cats? There's things I don't know." "You'll be all right," Will said, draining his cup of sugarless coffee. "It's what women do, isn't it?" I bowed my head over my sewing. It was what women did, but Lord, how many times in our months of travelling across the country had we met men with wagons full of children and a sack of old dresses? Men with wedding rings around their necks on strings. How many small stones had we passed on the trail? How many trees notched and carved with names? Flora, Susan, Martha, Patience. I looked at my children, at Rachel and Beth, and Thomas sleeping in a ball. What would become of them if I died? I couldn't imagine William coping. They'd be parcelled off to settle families while he found himself a new wife, or took off with a saloon girl and left them to grub someone else's farm for charity. My sewing shook so hard I couldn't make a stitch. I knew I mustn't die for their sakes. We only had a short period of lamplight. The kerosene was too dear. I put on my nightgown and got into bed, and Will took off his trousers and laid them by the bed. He got in with his shirt on and left the rifle in easy reach. Will turned out the lamp and settled under the quilt with me. It was the quilt I'd stitched myself during our courtship. If I looked hard at it in the right light, I could still find the patch I'd sewn on with the wrong colour thread where my patience was wearing thin. The darkness was total without the lamp. The windows were shuttered, but even if they'd been open, there were no lights on the prairie. No soddies or dugouts had been built nearby, and we had no neighbours yet. The night was cold, and kept as close to Will as the baby would allow. A wolf howled, and a handful of cries rose up in response. I kept my eyes closed and thought of the rifle.